According to our research, only 5% of global enterprises are currently future built, fully realizing the potential of AI across their operations. These organizations are experiencing 1.7% or 1.7 times higher revenue growth and 3.6 times stronger shareholder returns and 2.7 times greater ROI on AI investments compared to their peers. This stark contrast underscores the critical importance of strategic AI adoption. My name is Paul Nashawaty. I'm the practice lead and principal analyst for the application development practice. And I'm joined by Kevin from Mirantis. Kevin, how are you doing today?
Very good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, great to have you on. This is a super important topic as we kind of led off. There's a lot happening. Do you want to introduce yourself and Mirantis to the audience?
Sure. I'm Kevin Camel. I head up product management for AI here at Mirantis. At Mirantis, we've really been sort of this provider of platform technologies for the enterprise and service providers for quite some time. And now we're basically taking that experience that we've had historically and applying it to the AI domain.
Yeah, Kevin, it's really exciting to have you on because this is, as you can tell, a super important topic for industries. You cover the space, you know the space. Yeah, you know what we're talking about. In this episode, we're here to talk about the power of AI in enterprises and why some organizations are already realizing the remarkable results that we're seeing, but many are still uncovering how to fully capture the AI potential. So let's talk about here, Kevin, and discuss what it takes to really close the AI value gap and how businesses are going to position themselves for success in an increasingly digital world as these things kind of happen. AI makes organizations more competitive. AI makes organizations more adaptive to things, but it also has a lot of challenges as well. So, Kevin, I'd like to start with, your thoughts really around how proving AI's value in the enterprises, where we see in many organizations that are under pressures from their boards, from their CEOs, from the company itself to justify the AI investments really beyond the hype. We see in our research that only 5% of companies are future built. They're really looking at these AI scale, enterprise scale value, and firms that are achieving this are really getting that revenue growth, the shareholder returns, and the ROI on AI. What are your thoughts on the biggest challenges enterprise face to prove measurable business value from AI?
Yeah, I think everything that's old is new again. So a lot of the challenges that we kind of see right now are very similar to the ones that we saw in the dot-com days. No great insight there. A lot of the news is basically covering that, like, hey, this really feels like the early days of the internet again. And I would say the same types of challenges and the same types of responses really being dealt with by both enterprise and service providers in the spirit of that. So the first one is that people are trying to figure out what this technology is good for and how to leverage it. And people are trying to innovate on top of it, and innovation takes time. But a big part of the challenge that I think people are needing to sort of reconcile right now is that a lot of the platform teams that we came to rely on in the early 2000s are no longer part of the enterprise. They're no longer part of the service provider tech teams. So what this is requiring folks to do is really have to rethink about upskilling their teams. They need to do that not just on a personal basis, like you can't just go out and go hire these people. They need to step back and think about what are the needs of my organization and what does my organization need to become responsible for? And then what can we rely on vendors to go do? And again, this is like a very similar type of thing that ended up happening in the very late 90s and early 2000s. Is that people were starting to think about how to build up their data center capacity, how to build up their compute infrastructure in such a way that that type of capability could then support the needs of the business. Right now, we're sort of transitioning from, hey, we're doing cool experiments with AI, and now they're starting to think through this process of what are we going to need to do as an organization to take these experiments, to take these POCs, and actually do something productive with that within the enterprise.
Yeah, Kevin, I agree with you. I mean, there's a lot of similarities between that boom and the kind of the dot-com boom, but there's a lot of things that are kind of different too. Like, for example, in that early stage of the internet, the dot-com kind of stage, there was a lot of dark fiber was laid. It just wasn't used, right? And actually is actually lost. But that infrastructure still exists today. Where I think some things in the evolving AI infrastructure stack, it's really starting to leverage this AI technology in a way that's making the company money. So what we see in our research is that infrastructure for AI, or what we're seeing as AI factories, is now being viewed not just as a cost center, but it's actually a revenue engine. So when we think about this, the differences that we saw in the past versus now, Kevin, your thoughts around how AI infrastructure is fundamentally different from traditional IT? What are the shifts that enterprises are making to support this new class of workload? Because it's really different than it was, not too long ago, not just even a few years ago.
Yeah, so to talk about AI, what ends up happening here is that when you're building out AI deployments, that you need to have sort of these like purpose-built environments that are meant to support this type of technology. It's extremely high performance gear. Your conventional approaches within your data center just aren't going to work as part of this. And to just get into details related to this, you've got a bunch of sort of key differences. One is that you've got specialized hardware that's involved. You've got these GPUs. They're able to do this like massively parallelized types of calculations that enable training and inference at scale. You've got specialty vendors that are part of this. NVIDIA, a huge player there. They've really led the way for the whole entire space that we now see in front of us. There's new things that are coming. There's a lot of innovation happening in this space. So, TPUs, LPUs, these sort of like purpose-built ASICs that allow us to do efficient inference and things like this. And this type of stuff is happening all the time, these new types of technologies that are being released. So whereas data center, has kind of been a static, thing for maybe the last like 10 to 15 years, all of a sudden we see like all of this new innovation happening around this specialized hardware. And it's not just these like processors that are coming in, it's also specialized networking equipment that's here, things like InfiniBand and ROCE. Specialized storage is coming in too. You need both the high performance networking and the high performance storage in order to saturate these like very, very expensive and high performance GPUs that are there. And all of this is different. All of this is like new stuff that data center teams need to like become experts in and figure out how to efficiently leverage this stuff because it's very expensive. They need to be very, very thoughtful to make sure that they're efficiently using all of it. And you've got these new software frameworks that are in place basically to enable teams to go do that. That's part of what we're bringing to the table here. And then also there's one other like key difference here is just around the energy and cost implications. Like what we thought of as like very expensive data centers 10, 15, 20 years ago, it doesn't even touch how expensive these environments are today. So there's a lot of thoughtfulness around sort of like taking advantage and making the most use of every piece of equipment that's here. You look at, I'm just coming back from GTC DC out on the East Coast, and they're sort of like profiling, these new GB300s and things like this. And I'm sure everybody who's watching this probably also watched the keynote from Jensen. But as part of this, at the trade show, they show these NVL 72 racks and things like this. And like each one of these racks, it uses 150 kilowatts of power. It's absolutely crazy. Like, 10 of these racks is close to, 2 megawatts of power. It's like 750,000 houses worth of power that basically sits in the corner of an office. So it is.
It really is amazing, Kevin. I think when we think about this, we have to look at it in the context of what, like you started this conversation, what's old is new again type of thing, and you look at it, you're right. There's a leveraging and maximizing your existing IT investment that you have, utilizing that to its fullest capability. But there's also the strategic investment and the 5-year horizon that's coming, right? Well, and when we're looking at this from an AI perspective, according to our research, we see that agentic AI already accounts for 17% of the total enterprise AI value in 2025. And this is projected to reach 29% by 2028. So there's a lot happening. The data centers are going to have to support this. The tech stack's going to have to support it. But content, the evolution of the data center and changes in the data center, it happens very quickly, right? Give it 18 months, we're refreshing hardware. So how do you maximize that, right? But given all of this, where should enterprises focus their investments today, but also remain competitive 5 years from now? Because that tech stack is going to change, right? And I think you kind of alluded to it with the platform approach, the software stacks that are going to harmonize this technology. That's really going to be important. But does the shift lean more towards platforms like you're talking about and data-centric strategies, or talent, or something else? What do you think this is going?
Well, lots of different views on how to sort of leverage this technology and do the best. I think the key thing is that when you look at the use cases here and when you go talk to executives, they're really seeing this as sort of like an existential moment, that like the company that comes in within a particular vertical that is able to best capitalize on this and get an effective product to market that really delivers value the fastest will basically capture that entire market. There's a term land race that's around this. I think that that is the right term to use for this. And so because of this, you see the enterprise being very, very willing to invest here. In my view, I think that it's actually very easy to go out and sort of purchase the necessary hardware, especially if you've got the budgets already set aside to go do this. It's very formulaic at this point to figure out what you need to buy and how you're going to go deploy that. I think the real challenge here is around the skills of the people within the enterprise organization themselves. Enterprise organizations have increasingly taken their investments and they've moved it further up the stack. You find these very, very well-developed practices within just about every enterprise, especially within like the Fortune 5000, where they can basically build whatever applications their particular customers need. They're very, very effective at doing that. But that was actually a trade-off that's happened over the last 15 to 20 years. And the trade-off is that they've divested away from being able to manage infrastructure themselves in order to focus on their applications. So whereas you used to see lots of enterprise organizations having platform teams, and they would maintain data centers and they would have internal developer platforms and all sorts of capabilities that they would have, they kind of abandoned a lot of that and they moved it into the cloud. They don't have these capabilities anymore. And now we have this new foundational technology where this expertise is needed within the enterprise, people who can strategically think about this stuff. They don't necessarily have these people who are in the business who can support this. So I think what we see now is sort of like a stratified enterprise market that's here. You see some of these folks have a very proactive approach where they're trying to bring that talent back into their organization very quickly. They realize that even with a rich enterprise vendor ecosystem that's there, that they're going to need this expertise in order to make very good decisions around this thing. And then you see other folks who are being more reactive around this, where they're saying like, hey, I'm just going to follow the hyperscalers and go where they need to go. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see like where that proactive investment goes, because I personally do think these folks will have an edge.
Yeah, Kevin, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, when you think about aligning IT with the AI ambitions, everything you mentioned around, the platform teams, the operational side of it makes a lot of sense. But we're also seeing that in our research, we see that that 70% of firms protect less than half of their AI generated data, which raises a major risk and readiness concerns, right? This is a factor that, everything you just talked about. On top of that, now we have to look at the protecting of this AI information and this data. But when you think about it, if you have your platform teams or you have your resources that you have access to, a lot of those organizations are changing in favor of automation, right? But human in the loop is still a major part of the kind of delivery process, as it should be, in my opinion, at this point in this stage. Maybe in the future it will be removed or reduced, but right now human in the loop is important. But Kevin, I'll ask you, what are the most effective ways organizations are modernizing IT operations really to support those IT infrastructures? Whether it's hybrid infrastructure, like you said, moving to the cloud or staying on-prem, refreshing their existing infrastructure, or platform engineering or automation. I mean, that's a big part of it. And then also, what other common pitfalls are you seeing as part of this?
Well, there's a few different questions that are in there. In terms of sort of like the security angle that's part of this, your comment around the 70% that's there. So that's a very, very interesting topic because we sort of saw this when REST was first introduced in like the very early 2000s. I forget the exact year. Is like we rolled out REST and we really didn't have a good understanding as to what practices needed to be in place in order to secure that protocol and do the things that it needed to do. And there was an explosion of different approaches related to that that basically fell out of it. And at this point, we've sort of landed on a series of best practices, and there's a couple different products that basically support that. We're going through that same motion now around some of the agentic protocols that are in place today. MCP, for example, when the MCP protocol was put together, it was really around interoperability. And we pretty quickly found out when you look at some of the projects that are out there that like, hey, this protocol is great. It's particularly good at exfiltrating data from one API into another and sort of shuffling things around in a largely automated fashion. And that's not necessarily what we were hoping to see. It's also not the outcome that the business was going for as part of it. So now all of a sudden you start to see these different products again, a vendor ecosystem that's springing up around like, hey, we need to lock this thing down. We need to start thinking about how exactly we can go about ensuring the security of this data, because we don't want data moving from what is considered to be a highly secure service and moving into a largely insecure service. And we're going to need a whole thought framework that's around this. So that's sort of the first part of that. In terms of the second part, I think you were talking about sort of like operational efficiency and things like this. We have like a whole new like type of product that's coming into the market now, which relates to operational efficiency. There's different names for this. It's called event intelligence. It's called AI ops. It's things like this. But this class of products that basically allows the enterprise to do more with less. The idea here, going back to human in the loop, is that we basically have, and this itself may be agentic, these types of systems that will come in and look at the operational state of all of these types of systems that are being run. This is server infrastructure. This is services infrastructure. This is also all the way up to understanding what the user experience looks like. And we're sort of capturing telemetry that's related to this and assessing where things are going well and where things aren't going well, and then sort of highlighting that to the human in the loop. These systems have become, and the products that the enterprise is now offering are now so sophisticated that there's no way that a single operator can basically be responsible for managing all of it. And this sort of relates to one of the really, really big challenges that enterprise and service providers are dealing with right now is, hey, we're actually struggling with dealing with all of our infrastructure that we had already, and now there's this new very, very complex set of technologies that we need to master quickly. What are we supposed to do? And I think the general trend that we're seeing is that enterprise and service providers, again, are starting to step back and say, we need to prioritize reconciling and rationalizing our current infrastructure and basically enable ourselves to go adopt this new AI infrastructure that's coming, because inevitably all of this will merge together, but they need the sort of like headcount and focus in order to focus on AI outcomes today, and then focus on the sort of merging of all of this together later.
Yeah, Kevin, there's a lot there, and there's a lot to think about. I mean, I think when we look at our research and our, it states that the network is becoming the AI supply chain, data movement, inference loading, and governance that matter a lot more now than they ever have. And you already touched on this, which is the broader industry ecosystem with the vendors, the cloud providers, the platforms. They're all responding to these emergent requirements. So you're right. I think that there's a lot here that that organizations need to take into consideration. But as we come to an end, Kevin, there's a lot here that we talked about. Many organizations are just like really starting their journey here. They're kind of in the maturity curve. They're really early in the maturity. There's some organizations that are far along in their maturity. Where would you recommend the audience go to learn more about what we're talking about here?
Yeah, 100%. So if you visit Mirantis.com, and that's spelled exactly how it sounds, what we've done is basically put together a maturity model, and there's basically like a self-guided readiness assessment that's right there in the top part of our website when you land there on the homepage, that enterprise leaders and service provider leaders can basically come in and sort of self-assess and understand where they are with respect to their peers that are out there. I'll tell you that, in my conversations with folks, it really runs the gamut. Like some people are ready to go and they've made the appropriate investments and they're in a good place here. And other folks are just not even understanding what the requirements are that are coming down the pike. This assessment and maturity model basically enables you to understand where you are relative to your peers that are out there.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, that's really helpful to just get an understanding of where your own intelligence is. Be honest with yourself. Where are you at when you're in your own organization? But Kevin, this has really been insightful. Thank you for joining me today. This is awesome. It's an important topic. We already know that this is shaping the industries going out of 2025, going into 2026. Organizations are really getting tuned into this. And I want to thank you all that tuned in to us for this session. We really appreciate you being part of the AppDevANGLE community. But for now, that wraps up this episode. And we'll be back next Wednesday with another conversation diving into the tools, trends, and talents shaping the future of application development. Whether you're deploying at the edge, building with AI, or modernizing your cloud stack, we've got you covered. So be sure to follow us on social if you have any other thoughts, questions, or just want to connect. Until next time, stay curious and stay building.